What does it take to get beyond the damage of words? I'm Katrina Collier. Join me each week as I explore what it takes to step into a happier future. My guests are sharing their stories of when they realised that they needed help and what it took to take that first step, so that you leave inspired and maybe even start on your own path to self-love, care, compassion, and of course, happiness. So without further ado, let's hear their stories. Amanda Ashworth, welcome to Beyond the Damage of Words podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for
Thank
agreeing
you
to
for
come on.
having me. It's
Oh,
such an
you're
honour.
so welcome. Well, it's such an honour that you stepped into the space as well, because it's, we get talking, don't we? And straight to it, always. So what led you into healing? What created that journey into that space?
So it was very unintentional. So I've always liked to be a bit different. And
Mhm.
so about 8 years ago, I decided to start homeschooling. And then from
Yes, I remember
homeschooling
that.
allowed me to then start traveling.
Yeah.
And I remember about 5 years ago being on a beach in India and just
Mm.
feeling I don't think I realized how my faith had been lost in people and how much that
Mm.
trip had healed me in terms of restoring my faith, but also how that was the first time I think in my life I'd been truly contented and at peace with myself.
Yeah.
And that led me to
It's a magical country, isn't it?
so
There's something in
magical.
the
Yeah,
air. It's
def-
just, yeah.
definitely like Goa is my happy place.
Yeah.
And basically, what I realized is I had been on a lifelong journey of just abuse with myself that had kind of
Mm.
started in childhood and then I'd continued it. Nobody else had.
Yes.
It was my own
Mhm.
relationship with myself.
That little voice.
And yeah, and at that point, I had one daughter. I've now got two.
Mm.
Of
Mhm.
just going, I never want them to have this relationship with themselves that I have with myself.
Yeah.
And then from there, we then had another baby. COVID hit, and
Mm.
I was like, do you know what? I just realized that to be the best version of myself, I kept stopping myself. And this self sabotage and
Mhm.
this imposter syndrome and everything kept on
Yeah.
coming in. And so it seemed like the
So how
perfect
were
time.
you doing that? How were you stopping yourself? Give us an
So,
example,
so I
because I
had,
think it's everywhere.
yeah, so I had quite a few limiting beliefs. And at that point, I
Mm.
didn't even really know what limiting beliefs were and how much they stemmed and how deep they stemmed, and how anytime I wanted to move forward with something, I would find a reason not to, and I would talk myself out of it. And
Mm.
I just didn't, even if things were going really, really well for me, I don't think I truly believed I deserved it. And
Yeah,
it was
I
just
get
like,
that.
I want to do this work and let's just see where it went. And
Mm.
I started with a coach, and quite quickly I realized that I didn't know what I was looking for, but I was like, she's not what I'm looking for. And so moved on to another. And as I've kind of moved through coaches and moved on through my journey,
Mm.
I've ended up finding people that even if I haven't necessarily been ready for what they're going to say, l- it like 6 months, a year down the line, something clicks, and then I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
now I get it. And that's just part of going on my journey.
It is amazing. I have to congratulate you for changing. Sometimes people start with a professional and they think, well, I have to stay with that person. They feel this weird level of commitment. And actually, if you don't connect with the person, if they're not right for you, you've done exactly the right thing. You go and move on and try something else.
Yeah. But I also
Which I'm
don't
just really proud of you for doing that, because it's amazing how often people stay. It's like, why? It's not working for you. Try someone else.
but I also think if you're truly evolving, that
Mm.
person isn't going to suit you further down.
Mhm.
So like
Mhm.
even with my clients now, if they're still with me in 12 months time, I'm doing something wrong, because they should be at a different place and their
Yeah.
journey should be at a different place. That
Yeah.
what they'll need at that point is different from what they're going to need now. And
Mm.
I just think you're ever evolving.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think you kind of know what you need at that point then going forward.
Yeah. So when did you first identify these limiting beliefs, or how did someone explain it to you in
I kn
such a
I
way that
knew
you went,
that I
"Ah."
knew that I had them, and I think that so up until that point,
Mm.
I had what was it? Um, I had a period of where I had some IVF, and then I had a
Mhm.
miscarriage. And
Oh.
IVF is a massive roller coaster.
Yeah.
And, so although it had been successful, it got to the end and I had a miscarriage and it really hit me. And so I needed some counseling after
Mm.
that because I was just
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm just not okay.
Oh, it's
And
brutal, isn't it? I mean,
it's so,
on top of
it's,
the loss, you've got the hormone.
yeah.
It's brutal. Yeah.
And that's at that point that I probably realized that I didn't manage my mental health very well. So I would
Mhm.
go on these circles of,
Mhm.
I'm just like, now I'm all about managing it. And so I would overwhelm myself. I don't think I'd taken the time to ever really identify what made me happy. So I
Yeah.
used to do things that I thought would make me happy. And then I'd be like, but this isn't what really,
Isn't this meant to make me happy? Yeah.
well, you know how society, you almost tick a
Yeah.
box. You tick this checklist and you get to the end of this checklist and you're like, no, none
Mm.
of this is fulfilling me. Um, because it wasn't
We're all so
necessarily what you
different.
wanted in the first
Yeah.
place. It was what society was telling you wanted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you're
We're
like,
all so
actually,
different.
yeah, what fills my cup? So
Mm.
making sure so that now I know when my nervous system's heightened. I know when I need
Mm.
more rest. I know when I have a tendency to overwhelm myself. So when not to overwhelm myself.
Yeah.
And
And you
yeah,
learnt
just
this with the counselor that you first went to, or?
no, the counselor gave me techniques to just how to mange the grief, and just that it was
Yeah.
okay, and just to, in the
Yeah, very
process,
much
and
so.
helping me manage the emotional side of it. But the coach that I was with really made me sit down and like, firstly look at the evidence behind my limiting beliefs and really challenge them. So
Yeah.
now I can almost see them in my mind coming. And they it doesn't matter how much work you do, they're always going to
Mm.
creep back in. And
Mhm.
so I kind of envisage it almost like a tennis like bat, that I just bat
Yeah.
them away. That they've got no space
Yeah.
there, but I can recognize them, I acknowledge them, and then they're gone. Um,
Yeah.
but they still
Michelle
pop
taught
up.
me the, evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
So, like, I ask you to be on stage and the inner voice pops up and goes, "Oh my gosh, you can't do that." And it's like, "Well, isn't that interesting? What about the time that I spoke on stage here, 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 and here?" And then it goes, phew.
Yeah,
That one I
exactly.
love too, when it won't bat away.
Yeah, and this is the thing, you will always, and it's having that insight to actually go back and go, actually, when did that first
Mm,
happen? And most people,
yeah.
so generally your limiting beliefs are formed between the ages of 5 and 7. So most of the time you
Okay.
won't even remember
That makes
like
sense.
what that first thing was.
Yeah.
But they have such a big impact on
Yeah.
on what you can then go on to
I'm
do.
gonna challenge your limiting belief though that they'll always be there. They do really, really reduce to something that's so
And do
tiny
you know
though.
what? I think they get to such a the noise. So the only time
Mm.
I really hear a lot of noise is when I'm working out. That is
Oh,
the
yeah.
only
You
so
can't lift that. It's too heavy.
yeah, and that's the only time that I would say that it impacts me now. But I think that's why a lot of people are
Yeah.
quite scared to be alone with their thoughts, because the
Ah, that
narrative
makes sense.
and the stories they tell themselves, and your head can
Mm.
be a pretty scary place
Mhm.
if you,
And particularly if we've both had these traumatic
yeah.
childhoods. So you really, like you said, you're replaying the stuff that was said to you. I didn't realize it was that 5 to 7. That's really interesting. You're replaying it and you're replaying it until you learn to actually hear it so you can stop it.
But also knowing, again, once you've done the work, you know that your mind has a negative bias. So you're always
Mhm.
going to look for evidence to support that narrative that you're
Yes.
telling yourself. And
Yeah.
so something can be, and this is where, like, by doing the healing journey, you learn
Mm.
so much, but then it gives you so many tools to go forward.
Yeah. I wrote about that at the end of my memoir, because it was like something had come up. Oh, I don't know. HMRC envelope probably. Um, they always seem to have an impact on me,
Yeah.
and how I was able to pull in. I can't remember what I wrote. It's really funny. Or it was applying for actually for my visa in India, which also really weirdly got me all shaky. And I've applied for thousands of them. It was really strange. But anyway, it was like pulling in, like you're saying, that toolkit. It's so wonderful, isn't it? When you can just go, I'm going to use that and a bit of that, and then you're just calm. So, did
Yeah.
you find it scary to be quiet initially, or do you think you just did it
Yeah.
by
So
default and go,
so my third coach actually, and
Yeah.
she used to be a PT. So I'd done some boot camps with her, and she's very
Interesting.
into feminine and masculine energy. So I
Yeah.
very much verge on my masculine. So
Yeah.
I'm always doing,
Warrior.
doing, doing, and
Mm-hmm.
then I really struggle. Like I used to struggle
Mm.
just to
Mm-hmm.
be,
B.
and so I would always distract myself by so much, and I used to be like, but this makes me happy, and this is what I do, and this is
Sure.
no, to some extent it actually did, and that is
Mm.
definitely where I'm in my element. But
Yeah.
I would always know when there was a huge like imbalance between my feminine and masculine.
Mm.
And so recognizing that and making sure that I'm nurturing the feminine. And
Yeah.
actually in probably the last 12 months, I've really come into it, of making sure
Mm.
that, that I'm very much about just being, and like, so now I honor my cycles, and just
Mm.
taking this level of self-care, whereas self-care
Yeah.
used to always be the first thing that went out when I got busy. Now I'm like,
Of
no,
course.
because I know the consequence of letting that
Yeah.
go.
It's important.
So
It's really
important.
important. The rest is so important, and that like, and I think that when I get a bit frustrated, is that self care doesn't mean a bubble bath,
No.
like it's proper, genuine. Sometimes I get a bit frustrated. Like if I see one more sign that shows self care as a bubble bath, yeah.
Yeah.
I struggled to balance mine as well. To get from that very masculine warrior energy to balance, but it was so lovely when I did that as well.
It's
I
so
don't
it's
think I've written about that though. I think I've missed that out. It's good job we're having this conversation.
yeah, no, it's so nice to actually kind of stop, but also,
Mm,
so then I went on one extreme when I went on my journey of almost like self-development was a project for me. And that was
mhm.
all I was consuming. So I deliberately, the beginning of this year, set myself the task of at the beginning of the summer of like not listening to podcasts, not listening to videos, not listening to anything, and just
Yeah.
like learning to listen to me.
How did it
And
go? How was the first week that you did that? Where you were like, because I also think societally we're pressured, like
yeah,
not to. I mean, isn't there? There was definitely a trend on TikTok about like quiet walking or something. Bless these
yeah.
kids that don't understand how to just walk without having something plugged in their ears.
My 15-year-old
So
definitely doesn't. It doesn't matter where we are. He's got a headphone in his ear. Like you're just like, what are you doing? But I'm always used to doing five things at once,
right.
and
So what
learning
was it
to
like when you went
just
in that
learning not to
week?
judge myself, and learning what's going to come out, and just learning to
Yeah.
just listen. And because I think especially so my coaching business was quite new, and it was like you have
Mm,
so much information
exciting.
going, well, you should be doing it this way and you should be doing it that way, and I'm like, actually, do you know
Should
what, I
you?
should be taking my time to work out
Yeah.
how I want to do it and not be
Mhm.
influenced, and that's going to feel right. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just learning, because most of us
That word should.
should, yeah,
Oh, I was picking up somebody on that earlier today. Should you?
yeah.
That's a very heavy word.
Yeah, it's that, and also learning to know what's ego and what's intuition, and that's a
Mm,
really fine of just going,
yeah.
okay,
And so
because
has that
again,
happened in the last 6 months as you've
yeah,
deliberately
yeah, massively, and then just putting myself in situations that are gonna challenge me or take me out of my comfort zone, but being aware of it, and also I
Mm,
think now I come from everywhere that I don't judge myself ever. I'm
mhm.
always come from a place of kindness. And
Yeah.
so I'm just now a massive believer of where, if you'd asked me on my journey 3 years ago, I would have said everything was external that needed happening. And now the changes are all internal. And it's like, and they're going to just continue.
Yeah, yeah. It is totally internal. Now, as we're on the judgment word, we had a really interesting conversation before we hit the record button about coaches and therapists, and actually you had a judgy therapist. So
I did. Yeah. So
can you
when I
explain
was,
the difference between the two? Because I actually think though Michelle has a bucket ton of tools, I think she's much more on the coaching side. So I'm not sure I've had traditional therapy at any point.
okay.
So I'd be curious to your experience.
So when I was doing my Mind Valley training last year, my
Yeah.
mentor talked about that everybody needed a coach and a therapist. So I, at that
Okay.
point, was up until then, I was like, oh, I don't think I need one. But I was like, do you know what? I don't have anything to lose. Let's go through this
Let's
journey and
try.
let's just see, and
Yeah.
let's see the difference.
Mm.
And I picked a lady who it was interesting because culturally we were very different. Um,
Mm.
but I was finding it like hard when clients were crying,
Mhm.
that I felt that honored that they could cry in front of me, but I realized that I wasn't necessarily as good as being as vulnerable as I was wanting them to be.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I picked this therapist, and the difference between therapy and coaching is therapy looks back, coaching looks
Yeah.
forward. So
Yeah.
you might briefly in coaching touch on somebody's past, but
Mm.
it's more about taking action than kind of
Right.
discussing the past a lot. So
In
you
that
might
case,
need to
Michelle
like go
has got
back
to.
just to to go back.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, this therapist, what she actually the one of the lessons I learned from her was, because she was quite judgy,
Mm.
it allowed me to work through the process of when I'm feeling judged, of not to get my back up, and
Yeah.
that was an interesting one.
I know. And you think, why is she judging you? You're meant to be able to be vulnerable and say, like, I feel this or I'm experiencing this and not be judged. Like,
But then I think you would be
it's
surprised. So,
fascinating.
me and my partner, when we were going through IVF, actually, we saw a relationship
Mm.
counselor. And
Yeah.
this relationship counselor, and obviously, as a counselor or a therapist, you're not meant to have um,
An opinion.
an opinion or like a bias or anything like that, or bring
Yeah.
that into your
Of
work.
course not.
And she was very anti IVF. And she let this be known every single lesson. And I was like, okay, she's the wrong person. But so some therapists would
I'm
say that.
sorry. What the hell?
And I was just like, okay, this isn't, it's not something that at the moment, although we went on to have children naturally, at that point
Mm.
we felt like we were being told that we couldn't. So I was like, it's not a choice. But yeah, so
And
that.
I have no words.
But this is where I was saying
I
to you,
just
this particular therapy, this therapist
interesting.
had a view on coaches because she didn't necessarily feel that coaches were qualified enough to do it.
Yeah.
But I would question anybody that brings their like bias into any coaching or
I
therapy
know.
session, because it's not about
I
you.
know. No. Which is why I don't do it, by the way. It's why I do mentoring instead, because then I can just give my opinion. I don't have the patience. I think coaching is such an art, and I've had many coaches over the
Yeah.
years, and it's such an art. I just don't have the patience for it. It takes patience, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, because you're not meant to again,
Mm.
you're not meant to be the problem solver. And that's that thing
No.
of that person has all the answers within and they know what they
Yeah.
want to do. And this is why I actually get really angry with coaches online that try to sell their life as the dream life. And I'm like, what my dream life is not what the next person's dream life is, or the other person. So you have to really take
Yeah.
the time to work with someone for them to find
Yeah.
out what they want in their life.
That often hits me on my money values.
Yeah.
'Cause love having a nice home and all that kind of stuff, but I don't want one of these big waterfront homes with, yachts and rah, rah. Oh, you know what I mean. I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
exaggerating, but it's like, I don't want that lifestyle. Who's gonna clean it for starters? No, not for me. Now, I did see though amongst your notes, you went on a shamanic journey as well, didn't you?
I
How
did.
where did that fit in your process
So
of
I went to
finding
Bali in
yourself?
the summer, which was kind
Yeah,
of
just
like
gone.
the summer just gone. Yeah.
Yes,
So
Bali's
whole
beautiful,
kind
isn't it?
of eat, pray, love that,
Mhm,
as like probably the last 12 to 18 months, like as I've explored feminine and masculine, I've gone very much into like energy. And
mhm.
so I'm very much about almost setting myself personal challenges. So this year I turned 40. And so I had a
It's
friend
not
come out.
possible.
I had a friend come out to Dubai in January, who was
Yeah.
very much she'd left her husband
Actually,
at
I
home.
wrote that on your Facebook, didn't I? I think I was in disbelief as well. I always picture that because we've known
Yeah.
each other a while, haven't we? So it's like, what? What do you mean?
Yeah,
That
no,
means I'm
40.
this age. No, no. Anyway, sorry. So
Um,
you were,
yeah, so she came out and her husband's at home, so she lived her best single life here for a few weeks. But I
yeah.
was just like, I'm not 20 anymore. And so I was like, do you know what? I'm going to give up alcohol until my birthday. So it was like 5 months
Hmm.
of no alcohol. And that really changed. It changed my relationships. It changed like my hobbies, everything. Because I was
And
like,
just sleep.
and my sleep and, so much. But again, that was another situation where people judge you and you have to explain
Don't they?
yourself. And
Hmm.
it's just like, okay, I don't know if it's forever. And it wasn't forever, but it did
Yeah.
change my relationship. But I was like,
Yeah.
I'm very much like, I don't want to put a label on something like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Well, there's a lot of people who go, they're sober,
yeah,
or the, and I just don't drink. Occasionally, I will have a glass of bubbles, right? Occasionally, and usually I'm like halfway through it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because it's gone straight to my head. Because I stopped in 2020. I stopped as we came into 2020, which
okay.
is a lot. A lot of people have been spiritually awakening since the pandemic,
Yeah.
and that's hence the stopping drinking. But you're absolutely right. This whole like, we'll have what's it's almost like, what's wrong with you? Have a drink, and it's like, but I don't want to. I feel now when I have one, I feel awful.
Yeah.
I feel so sick the next day because it's poison, and it's like, I don't need it. I don't want it. I'm not interested.
Well,
But
no,
I hear what you're saying, the
it's the only
bigger
drug in the
pressure
world that you
almost.
actually have to defend not taking. That it's like, well, so that, like, I love that there's now this kind of curious sobriety movement, and people are
Yeah.
considering what life would be without it. But moving
Mm.
to Dubai last summer, everything is unlimited. So my alcohol kind of intake
Just
actually
next.
increased when we moved here. And I was
Right.
like, do you know what? Okay, I need a break. And so
Yeah.
then I could feel very much, I was more aligned with energy and my
Mhm.
vibrations and just
Mhm.
wanting to live like a really high vibe life and,
Yeah, yeah.
no drama, no, And so when I went to Bali this summer, I was like, I'd always wanted to see a shaman. And I was like, but I
Yeah.
think I was quite scared of what would be
That's
said.
fair. Mhm.
And she was incredible, and
Yeah.
this like the stuff that she knew and the stuff that she,
Mm.
and I think I needed to hear it as well. um
Mm.
and so what I have learned is, by trusting my intuition and
Yeah.
listening to myself, everything, like, even if hard stuff happens in my life, I'm like,
Mm.
this is happening for a reason, there's a lesson that
Yeah.
I need to learn. But I just live my life very much like the universe has my back, and I know it
Mhm.
has my back. And
Yeah.
then that's just like gives me this like kind of
Peace.
confidence, and
Yeah.
just going, it's the journey is going to go where it needs to go.
Yeah.
Um
And I
and
think that you've almost glossed over the really important part in there that you've realized is, like, when we do attract something in that's a bit negative, and a bit frustrating or whatever it is, or even if it's a complete total fucking nightmare. Oops, I don't think I've sworn on this podcast before. You've stopped and gone, well, isn't that interesting?
yeah,
Like, what's that about? What's the lesson? And you
yeah,
kind of thank the universe for the lesson. Usually say, please don't send me another one. I got it. Thanks. But
but
that
what
I
I
think
think,
learning to do that is really, really important, and I think a lot of people don't get that the universe will keep sending it until you get it.
oh
And so
yeah,
if you're not
absolutely,
getting
yeah.
them, if you're not taking that time to sit and go, "Well, this is interesting. What
Yeah, but
what's brought
also
this on?"
if you don't do the
Mm,
work, so if you don't believe that you're worthy of
mm,
something, you're not going to get it. And like I
yeah,
I've spoken a lot on my podcast about this, about
mm,
gratitude. And so
yeah.
at dinner with my children, we all have to go around the table and say three things we're grateful for from that day.
Yeah, that's
And
lovely.
but the amount of people that we've had come to dinner that can't think of three things.
I
And
woke up
I'm
in a really comfortable bed with a beautiful warm duvet over me, with a dog waking me up. There's 3 before I've even started my day.
yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
like, appreciate I've got food in the fridge. I've got electricity. I've got a flushing loo. I like, yeah. I
But
It
if you
doesn't,
can't appreciate what
gosh,
you have,
wow, that's
you
sad.
can't really expect the universe to send you more.
No,
And
no.
that's my view on it. And so that's where I've
Mm,
like it's really led me to spiritually kind of go.
yeah.
And I know we were talking before the podcast, and I was kind
Mm,
of touching on my childhood,
mm,
and that a lot of my limiting beliefs came from I had my mum was just very, very, very troubled,
mhm,
and she led a very difficult life.
yeah.
And the result of that was she spent all of her life seeking for something that she had there, but she just couldn't.
outside
recognize
of
it
the
was there.
yeah.
And yeah, and so in the end she actually committed suicide when I was 21.
Mm,
And going through that, and it just really makes you appreciate life.
mm,
And but nothing could have actually changed the course of
mm.
her life. It was work she needed to have done,
Yeah,
but
and she wasn't
didn't have,
prepared to do it.
didn't have the tools, or didn't have the and so like now I just feel
But
really blessed.
it takes a bit of is it gumption? It takes a bit, doesn't it, to do the work? I mean, once you start, you realize it's a hell of a lot easier than you think it is. But just to get to that point of going, I don't feel great. I'm going to ring a coach. I'm going to ring a therapist. That can be really scary for people. A lot of the reason I've written the memoir is because my own sister won't do the work. She's terrified
But
of
you can't, and this is
healing,
but
and
this is the thing. It's somebody else's
I can't
journey.
help her.
So,
But I've written it thinking if I write out my experience and what I went through, and hence, of course, I've got this podcast, people coming on and talking about the things that they've done and how they feel. It's like demystifying it so that
yeah.
therefore someone might just hear it and go, do you know what? I'm going to make that call. I am going to take that step. But you're
But
right.
do you
It's
know
like
what's quite
you
interesting?
can
So
lead
me,
you can lead a horse to water. You can't make it drink. So it's like your mum, my mum. They are never going to do the work.
no, but
Never
what's quite
didn't.
interesting with my sister is we
Mm,
were different ages, so we remembered my mum
mm,
very differently. But the
yeah,
pain is still with my sister, and so
yeah,
I wish she would do the work, but it's her journey.
yeah.
But what's
I
actually quite
get that.
incredible about it is she will actually say that my development and where I am now is down to my partner. That when I last saw her when she came to Dubai, she said, "But
Ouch.
you're so confident because of him." And I'm just like, "No, I'm so confident
No.
because of the work that I've done." And
Yeah.
you also would be if you
Yeah.
did that work, but it's for her to do it. It's not for me.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I two childhood trauma kids, my marriage was always going to break down, but I was reliant on him for my self-esteem. And you
Mm.
can't. You have to create your own self-esteem. And it's like it's
You
just the
have
worst
to.
thing in the world. You cannot rely. It takes the self-work. It takes that healing.
But it also takes, so I grew up in a very chaotic environment, and like my sister has repeated that, and I broke
Mm,
that cycle. But it's,
yeah,
there are still triggers, and there's still, so
there
I
is,
know,
Mary.
and this is where it is crazy because the work is never done. So for example, I think I like my birthday. It comes round to my birthday and then it triggers me every year.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter what anyone else does. It's
Yeah.
always going to be there. So I just need to like learn to manage it and like make it go away. Um, but learning to be vulnerable as well when
Yeah.
you've learned to be really independent, you've learned to have your walls
Mhm.
up,
You've
is
learnt to
really
survive.
tough. Yeah. But learning to that in order to be in a healthy relationship, that relationship
Mhm.
needs to be a partnership, and that's going to be good,
Yes.
bad. It's not always going to feel comfortable. Learning to, in my early 20s, my answer to everything was just to run away from problems. Well,
Mhm.
move house,
Can't
cut my
do that
hair,
when
get changed, get a different job.
can't do that when you're
You
married with 2 children.
no, not at
No.
all. And so I've got very comfortable now with stability, which I
Yeah.
don't. But again, possibly, 15 years ago, I didn't feel that I
No.
deserved it. And I
Yes.
felt like it was everyone else had it, and it
Mm.
wasn't ever anything that I was going to have.
No. But as you found the worth and you started doing the work and then realized it was possible, then and
Yeah.
there is that beautiful it's funny because the vulnerability piece comes up a lot, and a lot of usually as female survivors are to me like, "I can't be vulnerable." It's like, but there's a strength in being vulnerable, and it's so lovely when you just like, I notice it weirdly, when I often sort of probably show it the most to something I don't actually think is being vulnerable, but I'll be on stage, I'll have just spoken about something, and somebody in the audience will ask me something completely not related to the topic. Happens every time. And I'm like, I don't know. So I go, I don't know. Does anyone in the audience know? And that's being totally vulnerable. A lot of people would blag their way through it,
Yeah.
and try and pretend they know. And it's like, it's never bothered me doing that. But there's that that in itself is like one example that I can think of, but it's just people actually go, "Oh, you were so cool the way you handled that." I'm like, "Well, I didn't know the answer." So I said, "I didn't know the answer."
Yeah, and I think it
But
just
there's
shows
that
honesty.
honesty, and yeah, and it's funny because people really value it. They really go, "Oh god, you're so strong because you're so vulnerable." And it's
But
like
I
almost
think
the opposite. When you're strong to survive, you think, "I can't be vulnerable." And yet people go, "It's such a strength in you." It's fascinating.
but
That's
I
one of
also think
parts of my journey.
but I also think there's still a lot of stigma to coaching and
Yeah.
to getting in help. And so
Yeah.
even when I first, when I engaged my first coach, what, 3.5 years ago, there were
Oh,
people like that didn't understand it, that were like,
no.
it's almost this alternative hippie, oh, kind of, what's she
Oh,
doing now, kind of. And I'm like, and people just don't get it. So like, even if I've recommended like a coach, and people are like, because there's, so for example, my partner, when
mm,
he's gone through coaching now, and now 100% gets it and it's worth, but there
yeah.
was a sense of masculinity to it, and it was like he
Mm,
felt at the point, well, there's not like, and I was like, I'm not saying there's anything
yeah.
wrong, but I'm just saying, like, you've seen the development in me.
Mm,
Are you giving, like, are you 100% being what you want to be? Are you living your true self? Are you living
yeah.
all of this? And there's so
Can you
many
hear your
different things,
intuition?
yeah, that you can explore. But also now, as a parent, I
Mm,
also feel like I owe it to my children to
yeah.
do the work, because that's going to
Yeah.
impact them. So like me and my 15-year-old, we have a great relationship, and a very
Mm,
opening and talking about. And I don't want him to hide things from me, and I
mm,
want him to be able to speak to me. But my 6-year-old, she's particularly emotional, and like she's very highly sensitive. So whether or not she's excited, sad,
mm,
happy, it. But
yeah.
like, helping her understand how she feels and what she
Mm,
needs,
yeah.
you know, it's not just kind of,
HSP is genetic, so
yeah,
it's you
yeah.
or your husband.
No, so
One of you.
she's not like diagnosed, but she just is like very
Oh, yeah, no,
sensitive.
no.
Yeah,
Believe me, there's nothing wrong
yeah,
with it. It's actually 1 in 5, 1 in 6 people. I'm one of those, so I can smell stuff, hear stuff, feel stuff that, others can't heal.
yeah.
I know people that are very much on the taste, like everything has to be super, super strong. But it's 1 in 5, 6 people.
But
And
then
it's
even with
that
her
that
working,
beautiful emotion. It's lovely.
but working through with her, of some of
Mm.
actually her emotions were learnt emotions. Like, some of
Oh,
her
interesting.
meltdowns were learnt because we would try to pacify it. Because in a situation where you've got people judging you, and like, you're just like, okay, how do I get this
Yeah.
meltdown to go away?
Stop it. You're melting down in the supermarket.
Yeah, but getting her to actually go, okay, actually, so now she's rewarded
Mm-mm.
for, like, or recognized for calming herself down rather than me calming her down.
Oh, I
That
love that.
she's just taken some time, and she's just braved, and then
Mm,
she feels
that's
fine.
amazing.
But
Yeah.
like, learning to, like, not many people, like, and I talk about this a lot, that we've just got used to generally feeling quite crappy in life. That,
Mm,
whether or not it's the food that we eat, whether or not it's the rest that we get, our environment, our use of social media, like, most of
yeah.
us don't know what it feels to just feel
Good.
really well and happy and good.
Yeah.
And so this is where, like, learning that, when you do feel dysregulated, when there's an imbalance in your
Mm,
hormones, or
mm.
you know we ignore that.
There's help.
And this is where illnesses come into play. you know
Yes.
if you look at the rise of anti-inflammatory diseases, if you don't do that inner work,
Yeah.
have you read The Body Keeps Score? It's like
Yeah.
one of my
Well, no,
favorite.
I've read it didn't start with you, but yeah.
Yeah,
No, I've written about how the trauma showed in my body and
yeah,
how my father suppressed his anger and got heart disease.
yeah,
And that's one of the signs is suppressing anger gives heart disease. And it was like, this is exactly what happened to him. It was like,
yeah.
wow,
And so that combination
that
of
looks
just going,
amazing.
you owe it to yourself to
You
do
do. Yeah.
that work. Because, and it's not, as I say, you have to go back, and because
No.
you can't change it, and you don't have to relive
Mm.
it, and you know you
Yeah, I've had
have
a few
power.
guests who haven't. Mm.
Yeah,
I
you
think
have
it I
power.
think it depends. I think it depends. So I
Yeah,
did in a way, but I always went forward. And you haven't needed to. And I think it just depends. I think it's almost like we've been talking about just how individual everybody is, if
Well,
that makes sense.
we touched on this earlier. So, a lady called Marissa Peer, she has
Mm,
"Tell Yourself a Better Lie," and
yeah,
so with
I love
me, with
that.
my mum, I learned so, and I do this with a lot of things now.
Yeah.
I play around with a narrative,
Mm,
and half of what you actually tell yourself isn't true anyway.
mhm,
Um,
for sure.
and so, so with my mum, I just told myself the narrative that actually she was troubled, she did the best job that she could, and that
Mm,
from that, that sits right.
yeah,
And so it's about playing around with something until actually you don't
yeah.
hold a negative emotion. You're not going to get triggered by it.
That energy you're talking about, you don't hold
Yeah.
any energy around it.
Yeah. And just going,
It
okay, do
helps.
you know what? I'm at peace.
Yeah,
I
and I
can't.
think that's the important part, whichever path someone takes, is to get to that point where they're at peace with it.
Yeah. And I think you can't look, and this is what I will say, that whether or not it's a past relationship or something, that
Mm,
that I just believe that everything in your life has happened for a reason. And so
mhm,
that quite often people will ask you the question, well, would you change anything? And
mm-mm.
it's like, no, because actually that would
Mm,
change who I am
mm.
now, and I really like that person.
Oh, I don't know. There's a few things I'd nip in the bud sooner, but anyway, we're at time, believe it or not.
Yeah.
If people want to get in touch with you to discuss more, to hear about what you're doing
Yeah.
for your own coaching business, where's the best place? And I'll put a
um
link, obviously.
yeah, so even my website, which is amandaashworth.com, or on Instagram.
Complicated one like mine.
Yeah. Or on Instagram, I'm Dubai Travel Mum.
Perfect. I'm just writing that down so I'll make sure I link to it as well. Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing conversation. I really
Oh
appreciate
no,
it.
thank you for having me.
Thanks. Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Damage of Words. How brave, how vulnerable, all to inspire listeners like you to take a step or inspire others to take a step. Imagine what healing we could create if we normalize this conversation. So please pass this on and, of course, subscribe so we can do just that. Until next time, thank you.